Hello, what do we have here? A world map. So today I'm going to talk about something that's very interesting. So this is not a history lesson, but lessons to be learned from history. Understand the difference. It's not a history lesson, but lessons to be learned from history which the world doesn't seem to be learning. Let me explain. The two supposedly superpowers in the world, they always seem to poke their nose everywhere. And more so, these guys. They think they are the saviors of the world. I'll give you examples. Okay, we'll go year wise. We start with the middle of the 20th century. So you had the Korean War affecting this whole region. Look where the US is, more than halfway around the world. So the Korean War was from 1950 to 1953 between North Korea and South Korea. And now, what is the current situation? The United States has troops in South Korea and backs them. Why? Okay, obviously they are anti-communist, so North Korea is a communist state, but it's no business of theirs, according to me. So meddling in other people's affairs. Okay, then we'll move on to the next example. Russia was the first country to explore space, and in the 1950s, their space program was way ahead of the US. So they were the first country to send a man to space, and again, the first country to send an animal to space. Both these happened in 1957 when the first dog Laika was sent to space, and then in 1961 the first man was sent to space. Right? So then what happens? Then the US gets rattled and they go into the FOMO mode, fear of missing out. So in 1969, they say we will go a step ahead and they send the first man to the moon. Right? That's just because Russia went into space. No other reason. They didn't have any other reason to do that. That's proven by the fact that since 1969, 55 years, 56 years have gone by, and the US hasn't sent anyone back to the moon. So it's not like there was a program to explore something and then continue it. It was just to get one step ahead of the Russian in the space race. Okay? So that's the second story. Then another good example. So during the Cold War, okay, after World War II, there was a Cold War between the US and Russia again. They always seem to have a problem and want to dominate the world. So the US had basically installed missile systems close to Russia in NATO countries. Okay, and NATO was expanding towards Russia. So in response, Russia installed missiles facing the US in Cuba. That was the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962, which lasted for 13 days. And the world was on the brink of a nuclear war. Why? Because these two big brothers wanted to show that they are more powerful. And Russia had way more many uh, nuclear warheads than the US at that time. The only thing that diffused the situation was Kennedy and the head of Russian of the USSR at that time, Nikita. They agreed to de-escalate, and in exchange for the US removing their missiles from Turkey, Russia removed their missiles from Cuba. And that's how the Cuban Missile Crisis was diffused and ended. So that was another thing of the US wanting to match Russia and meddling in other countries. Then we'll move to the Vietnam War. Again, Vietnam was divided into North Vietnam and South Vietnam, and Russia was backing the North Communist Vietnam, and the US was backing the other half. And the US lost so many troops, or the North was even backed by China because Russia and China both were communist, USSR and China at that time. And the US was backing the South, and we all know how much money they pumped into this war and how many troops they lost. For what? Where are you? Why are you interfering here? So that was the Vietnam War, which went on from 1955 to 1975, 20 years. Thankfully, after that, Vietnam was reunified and we have just one Vietnam now, unlike North and South Korea, who are technically still at war. Right? Then, after that, in 1979, you have the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. Russia invaded Afghanistan. All this was also a part of the USSR. So Russia was the USSR was right till here. So they just invaded Afghanistan to defeat the so-called Mujahideen or insurgents, as you call it. So what the US does, the US also pokes their nose here, and they create the Taliban Mujahideen to counter USSR. And then what happens? We all know how the Taliban came back to bite the US. Yeah, many people don't know. The Taliban is actually the creation of the US to counter USSR. But the Taliban later bit the US where it hurt the most. And even later, the United States tried to get rid of the Taliban in the Afghan war, and we all know now who's in control of Afghanistan. So another failed attempt at meddling in other people's affairs. Then we'll move ahead. Again, the Berlin Wall in Germany was a result of the Cold War, right? So Germany was divided into East and West Germany, and right through Berlin. So East was controlled by Russia, West again controlled by who else? The United States. And Berlin Wall fell in 1989. That was because the communist side opened the wall and let people through. So again, I don't understand these two countries poking their noses everywhere. And the US always pokes their nose because Russia is there. They don't want to miss out. Thankfully, Germany is one country now and happy all together. Again, unlike for North Korea and South Korea. Then, after 1989, another example is the Gulf War of 1990. 1990, Iraq attacks Kuwait. And who goes to defend them? Uncle Sam. Why? I mean, yeah, they might be having some good motives, but that was all for the control of oil fields, nothing else. There's always an ulterior motive, right? That was 1990. Then, when the Cold War ended with the disintegration of the USSR, which included all these countries, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, right? All these countries were part of the USSR. So when the USSR disintegrated, now that also happened because of someone wanting power, right? So what happened was Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Belarus, these countries were looking to gain independence from the USSR. USSR Union of countries. So Gorbachev was the head of the USSR at that time, and Boris Yeltsin wanted to take over. So what he did, Boris Yeltsin made a pact with these countries that they could gain independence and split from the USSR, and the USSR would be dissolved, and a country called Russia would be formed, and Boris Yeltsin would be the head of Russia, and these countries would support him. So out goes Gorbachev, and in comes Boris Yeltsin, who gains control of Russia. And who was the first to recognize all these new countries? Uncle Sam, who were very happy that the USSR was no longer there and countries split, right? But then later on, the story goes on long because then all these countries had Soviet era nuclear warheads with them, and the US had a tough time in convincing them to disarm. So, and the interference continued. So, after that, then what would we have next? The list goes on, right from 1950s to current. Okay, so then in 2010s, we had the threat of ISIS in Syria, right? Everyone remembers that Iraq and Syria and all, ISIS was a big threat, and even more than Al Qaeda, it became the deadliest terrorist organization in the world. Now, who defeated ISIS, who met the end in 2017? It was Russia and the Syrian government fighting together. The US couldn't do it. Okay, so the world should be thankful to Russia and Syria actually for getting rid of ISIS. But then what happens? The United States supports the rebels in Syria against the Bashar al-Assad regime, which went on for years, and finally the Assad regime fell and he had to flee to Russia, which is what the US wanted. So they are okay with supporting rebels also in other countries, right? Talking about legitimate governments and all that bull. So this Assad regime fell in December 2024. Then we have the current situation going on between Russia and Ukraine. So Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. Now that's a big backstory to it, why they have done it, which I'll not go into today. But again, who is supporting Ukraine with uh, militarily and economically? US. They're pumping in so much money into Ukraine, a lot of arms to counter Russia. What's the purpose? Are they the dad of the world? So this is yet to play out. Still an ongoing crisis. Right now, Trump is talking to Zelensky and Putin, and hopefully the crisis will end and we can have peace again. Don't interfere in the first place. That's my point, right? Then you have another crisis between China and Taiwan. China now for decades is looking to take over Taiwan, and they even threaten to do it force. Now, who do you think is the main supplier of arms to Taiwan? Uncle Sam. What is their purpose here? I'm not saying that China taking over Taiwan is correct or whatever. That is a different story. But who gives these guys the right to go anywhere and everywhere like they're the guardians of the world? It just beats me. And if you see all the incidents that I explained, all have led to chaos and nothing has turned out well, barring a couple like Germany, which has been unified. Otherwise, there's always been a split or an ongoing crisis or something, with the US meddling in other people's internal affairs. Right? So, so many examples I've given you. But the United States, they don't want anyone meddling in their own affairs. So they build the wall to stop Mexicans from coming in. So they want their place safe, no one coming in, no one meddling. And now they've even gone a step further to say that Canada is the 51st state of the US, and that will happen. And then one more step further, saying that they want Greenland, which belongs to Denmark. And why they want Greenland? Supposedly to counter Russia, so they can have military installations here. I would say just give the whole world to the US, right? And let's not forget the one thing, maybe one of the top things that has ever happened in the world in history. The US is the only country to have used nuclear weapons against another country when they bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki in during the Second World War. The only country to have used nuclear weapons. And they preached to the world about world order, and peace. Right now, there are around 10 countries that have nuclear weapons, but the US is only one to have ever used them. And they don't want others to get nuclear weapons. Like, for example, in the late 1990s, when India tested the atom bomb, the US put sanctions on India. You should not have nuclear weapons. You should not have nuclear weapons. You should not have. But we should. So I don't understand this greed of world domination or whatever you call it and meddling into everyone's affairs. They even meddled in Sudan, and now you have Sudan and South Sudan, right? Just break up everyone. So these are just my views on world history and the lessons we can learn from them. You guys tell me whether you agree or disagree or whatever your thoughts are. Please comment on my video and let me know your thoughts, and we can have a nice healthy discussion. And I'll see you soon with more interesting videos like this. Till then, stay safe, take care. Ciao.